And I'll tell you one of the things I find interesting is you've only been down there since what? You were elected in 2012?
2013, so 2.5 years.
2.5 years.
Seems like 20 years already. I'm just kidding.
Exactly. And it always seems like that's how it is for most of these people who've only been there for a few years. But you've got this budget issue that's taken how long to develop?
Right. The issues have been around for 20 to 30 years. The issues that we're dealing with, the seeds of the problems have been around for a really, really long time. So you're right. These are fundamental structural issues that we're still dealing with 30, 40 years later.
Or maybe they never dealt with it before and now...
Well, that's a good way to describe it, right.
That's what it almost seems like. I mean, in your view, how in the world did we get there? How did we get there?
That's a great question. I think the finger of blame can be pointed in many, many different directions. Both parties, Republicans and Democrats. Well, there are times that Republicans have been in the governorship and Republicans have controlled the House and Senate. Same with Democrats. At some point, everybody's had a hand in creating the mess that we're dealing with right now. These issues have been around for a really long time. I think, unfortunately, having been in the media and covered it from that standpoint over the years as well, I think, unfortunately, sometimes people take the easy way out instead of making tough decisions that need to be made at that moment. You push the issues down the road, you kick the can down the road, and you don't deal with the issues because they're tough issues.
And they are hard. Oh my gosh. If they were easy, we wouldn't have a problem.
So I think sometimes in the political world, you kind of like, well, we'll deal with it down the road. We'll kind of put a temporary patch in there, and then 10, 15 years, we'll deal with that. And I think that's especially with the pension situation. And suddenly, it's time to pay the bills, and the problems surface, and you've got to deal with them. And I think we're kind of at the point right now in Illinois history that a lot of things that were, the can was kicked down the road, and now we have to deal with them. And the solutions are never very easy.
One of the questions I guess I've got is, this pension covers hundreds of thousands of workers, right? I mean, it's a whole bunch of them. We're talking about all the teachers. We're talking about, all the ASME people that work in, who's covered by the pension? We're talking police and fire.
Well, there are 4 or 5 different categories of people. You have state employees, you have teachers, you have university employees.
Prisons.
Right, so there are different categories of state employees or government employees. Police and fire are actually covered under local government pension systems, so that's separate. Completely different issue. Local governments have their own issues with pensions, but the state doesn't deal with police and fire. That's a different situation. But yeah, we're talking about a lot of employees, and a lot of people's lives and retirement income are affected, so some serious decisions are being made.
Absolutely. And one of the questions I've got is, it just sounds to me, what I've kind of had filtered, is that they've got their money that's going into their pension, and as opposed to staying in that account or whatever, that it had been sort of raided and filled with IOUs. Is that
right? Well, we talked about this being a long-term problem. What happened in the 90s and probably to a greater extent in the 2000s, the state, instead of making its full pension payment, decided not to pay the pension payment or borrow money to make the payment. And if you're familiar with retirement systems, whatever you don't put up front, you pay down the road.
Right, because it doesn't accrue any benefit,
interest. So, especially in the 2000s, especially during the recession when things were really tight and revenue wasn't coming in, they took the easy way out. They decided, instead of making that, $3, $4, $5 billion payment, we're going to divert that money elsewhere. And that's fine. It's great for if you're in political office at the time because you're able to fund programs and not have to make cuts. But when you don't make those pension payments, the state constitution says you cannot diminish benefits. At some point down the road, you've got to pay. The piper. And so,
15 years down the road, that $5 billion becomes $10 billion or something.
So what happened in the mid-90s, actually under a Republican governor, they created a new ramp because in the 90s the pension problem was a huge issue as well. And they were running a large deficit. So what they decided to do is change the payment schedule. And so similar to a car loan, what they did in the mid-90s, they approved a new payment plan to pay off the liability, which was increasing greatly. They said, well, we'll keep the payments small the first few years, first 3, 4, 5 years. But around 2011, 2012, the payments are going to balloon. They're going to ramp up.
which is very...
Well, guess what? Now we're in 2012, 2013, now we're in 2015. We're at the high end of that payment schedule. So this is a payment plan that was dictated 15, 20 years ago, but now we're paying the price, and that ramp, we're at the top of the ramp. So when we talk about squeezing out other areas of the budget, that's what we're dealing with right now. According to the pension ramp that was approved in the mid-90s, we're at that high point. We're paying a lot of money to
make up
for what wasn't put in years ago,
Right.
and that squeezes out other areas of the budget. We don't have as much money for education, healthcare, important programs the state provides. So
Absolutely.
that's really, given a historical perspective, where we're at right now and why pensions are becoming such a big deal, simply because of decisions that were made 15, 20 years ago.
So then I'm going to throw a few, talking points, because that's all people seem to get is the talking
Yep.
points. Okay, so as you've just described, the idea that, well, it's this blue state and the Democrats did it, okay, we understand that that's not necessarily true. That there were a lot of people that were in office during that period of time. Matter of fact, Illinois almost has as many Republican governors as Democratic governors, actually. I guess I'd have to check the prison records, but...
And there's a lot of records to check, unfortunately.
That's right. so that's kind of the first talking point. The other one that I wanted to talk about is that whole spending is out of control in Springfield. Is it really spending is out of control, or is it that this schedule now has just reached the high point, and I guess that's spending, but...
Well, it is spending.
You're obligated.
Right. We just had a court case this year that there was a pension reform that passed,
Yes,
and
Governor Quinn's.
and kind of reduced the cost of living adjustments. And it was taken to court, and the state Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. Illinois is one of those states that has very explicit language in the state constitution that says you cannot diminish benefits. And everybody thought it was going to be proven unconstitutional, and it was. So you're right. I mean, you can complain about that spending, but the state constitution says you've got to protect people's retirement income. So again, it makes it much more complicated to try to resolve some very, very real problems.